Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in dairy nutrition. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell, going to be your host here this evening, and I'm joined by Dr. Clay Zimmerman. He'll serve as my co-host, and we've got our resident professor emeritus, Dr. Bill Weiss from The Ohio State University. And we're also joined by our guest, Dr. Jim Drackley. Jim's giving a presentation here at the Tri-State Nutrition Conference this week, and the presentation is titled Major Accomplishments in Calf Nutrition and Growth. Bill, why don't you take it away and find out what this presentation is all about.
New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
I just need to preface this that I am by no means a calf expert. I can tell you they're more than just little cows. So I guess, Jim, what I'd like to start with is, and this is kind of a bias of mine, but you spent a lot of work on NASEM.
Yes.
Can you kind of summarize the big picture things that changed with respect to start with the young calf?
Sure. Thanks, Bill, and I'm glad to be here, Scott, today. So the NASEM publication was a major revision over the NRC 2001. We developed a completely new requirement system for the calves, both energy and protein. We, with your help, developed a new mineral requirement estimation using the factorial approach where we could. Which was a big change over previous editions. And of course the model changed with the new equations for the requirements. I think the model does a better job of predicting growth in calves. And the literature review was extensively updated as well. So those were the big picture items that changed.
So stick with the big nutrients, energy and protein. How is this going to change the feeding of, again, these young calves, this model?
Yeah, I think the NRC 2001 did a fairly good job of estimating the feeding level and the growth that would be produced from that feeding level. The NASEM model is as I said, more accurate, and the requirements for the highest level of gain are a little bit lower than with the NRC 2001. The protein requirements also have edged downward a little bit so that the maximum protein concentration in a milk replacer is about 26%, which is pretty close to the protein level in whole milk.
Jim, I was wondering, with genomics, we've changed the genetics of the dairy cow quite a bit, and I'm kind of curious, how has that impacted the calf, and has their requirements changed because of that?
Well, we don't really know for sure. I think the systems have changed. With a new NASEM system, we're actually using data from Holstein calves that were slaughtered in comparative slaughter experiments to actually determine the composition of the body. We know that the cattle are leaner than they used to be, so that's one change. But we just don't have enough data to say specifically how the calf requirements have changed, but undoubtedly as the Holstein cow has gotten leaner, we're making a leaner calf too, and changing the requirements for energy and protein respectively.
Right. You know, I'm kind of curious as well. We've seen an acceleration in the change of the animals, the lactating animals. Are we going to have to change NASEM a little quicker this next time?
Well, not with my help, that's for sure. Yeah, I think that's a problem with the NRC or NASEM system, is that it's hard to keep it up to date. Even if we do it more often, we're always working from behind because we're using data that's been published. So you're looking at data that's probably a minimum of 10 years old by the time the committee gets used to it. So it's tough to keep it updated, but I think we need a new one probably a little sooner than the 20 years it took to get the NASEM out.
Yeah, makes sense.
How do you, and I don't know if you have stats on this or not, but how common is this accelerated system, and does the NASEM do pretty well with that feeding system?
It does. It does predict very well. The last NAMS survey, National Animal Health Monitoring System survey, was in 2014, and the average amount fed in that survey was 5.7 liters. So it's somewhere in between what we call conventional and intensified or accelerated. So I think the last 10 to 15 years has really seen the amount of milk being fed increase. I don't really have a good feel for how many are feeding a real aggressive intensified formula, but certainly producers as a whole are feeding more milk than they used to.
And what intrigues me a lot is the effect on the cow once the calf. What's the mode of action, and how big is that effect?
Yeah, the effect is about 1,000 pounds in first lactation. As far as the mechanism, we don't really know. There's been 3 or 4 studies that have looked at gene expression changes in the developing mammary gland and shown a lot of changes. Of course, it's hard to relate those to the adult cow that's producing milk. Whether we're changing something in the mammary gland specifically, or whether it's a greater development of the functional ability and the digestive tract and liver and everything that supports lactation, we don't really have a good explanation for it.
Does it? I wanted to just follow up, and then does it? You said first lactation. If people looked at second and third lactations, and it continues, or?
Yeah. So the effect is additive, so that the second lactation yield would be correspondingly increased as well.
So that's a lot of milk. It'll pay for a lot of milk replacer. So.
Yeah. Mike Overton did a nice economic analysis several years ago for the Western Dairy Management Conference, and his dollar value that he put on it as an advantage was $205 per calf.
Jim, in retrospect, it seems like almost intuitive that, yes, we should feed to meet that calf's requirements. And I'm kind of curious, how did the paradigm come about where we have restricted feeding?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. Of course, the milk is what's being sold, so producers have an economic incentive to sell all they can rather than feed it to the calf. With the development of the early milk replacers, they were pretty nasty things, to be honest, and they couldn't feed much more than a pound or so of solids without causing problems in the calf. So I think it was a combination of those factors. The mindset was always, let's feed them a limited amount, so that'll encourage them to eat more starter at an earlier age, and we can get them weaned and do away with the extra labor of feeding a liquid diet. The likelihood of scours goes away when you get them off milk, and just several reasons like that. So it just became ingrained in the dairy management system.
Yeah. Do you have a feel for what % of the producers out there are feeding an adequate plane of nutrition to the calves?
Yeah, well, as I said in the answer to Bill, the average was 5.7 liters, so we're somewhere between the 4 quarts or 4 liters that was traditional and the 6 to 8 liters that we think is more adequate for the calf. As far as a percentage, I really
Maybe
don't
half
know.
of them.
I'm guessing that a third at least are feeding what we'd consider an adequate level. Maybe it's closer to half now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been in the industry 33 years now, and the changes that have taken place on the calf side. I remember the change from the pound feeding rate of
Right.
milk replacer to 20 ounces.
Yeah.
And actually, when I first started in the industry, there was still the paradigm of trying to wean calves even earlier.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, same when I started.
Some of those 3 and 4 week weaning
Mm-hmm.
programs. And so, what's the typical weaning age now?
I think in the NASEM survey, the average was still between 8 and 9 weeks of age. So the farmers never really adopted those early weaning programs. They're just, everything has to go right, and you have to be really aggressive in management to make that work at such an early age. And I think most farmers wait till the calf is a little bit older and ready to wean and avoid some of the problems of weaning.
There's a lot of beef on dairy now.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been research on those calves, or do you think they'd be different than a dairy calf? Or?
I think there's just research starting to come out now. We've done a couple studies with the crossbred calves, and they do very well on the dairy programs. But I think there's, I know a couple of the companies have some more in-house data on them. I think that they grow pretty similarly to a dairy calf in the milk-fed period. And then the question is, how do you feed them after that? Because they're still young relative to a typical beef calf at that point. So we'll see a lot more information coming out in the next few years on how best to handle them.
Okay.
Jim, I'm curious. Amino acid nutrition of these young calves. What's the status of that right now?
Yeah. Well, again, I think that there's private corporate research with a couple of the companies that have some pretty good ideas. In general, if we're using whey-based milk replacers, which is the most common protein source now, we need to supplement with methionine. It's typical to add some lysine just to make sure we're meeting the requirement for that, probably limiting amino acid. Threonine is can be a limiting amino acid, particularly when we start to get into soy-based milk replacers. So I think we know quite a bit about them. The committee just, to be honest, we ran out of time in trying to push that. It just was beyond the scope of what we could do. And I think that the data are still, they're not real strong yet in the calf, at least what's available in the refereed literature. So we declined to establish amino acid requirements. But I think there's, the CNCPS system is going to have or does have amino acid requirements defined. So I think we can get in the ballpark.
Do you think if we balance for amino acids, because these don't have to be rumen protected, do you think it's going to be cheaper or better? Or?
I think one of the strategies is to say if we need a 26% amino acid protein milk replacer, we could drop that, say, to 24% and supplement the key amino acids, methionine, lysine, and end up with a cheaper formula than the.
What would
the
make,
26.
if you drop protein a couple points, something has to go up, so would this be lactose?
Probably
or?
lactose,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. We've talked a little bit about the accelerated nutrition having an impact on milk production in later life. What do we know about the impact on perhaps cows' health and longevity?
That's a really good question. I don't think we know enough about the long-term effects of the cow. We're still working on kind of associative studies where we can show that if calves were fed more milk in early life, that they have more milk production. But we don't have data for multiple lactations from very many studies to look at health or longevity. Again, I mean, the general principle that a calf that is healthier and doing better in early life will be a better milk cow, I think, holds. And so there's no reason to think that it's going to be an adverse effect. If anything, it should be a plus.
Yeah, makes sense. Seems intuitive. Yeah.
And I can't remember how long ago this was and what popular press, but there was quite a debate on feeding hay.
Yeah.
So would you kind of give us your point of view
Sure.
on these young hay feeding of these young
Yeah.
calves?
So the argument against it is that, one, it's very poorly digested in a undeveloped or not mature rumen. So they're not going to get very many nutrients out of it other than the easily solubilized nutrients. The second argument against it is that the idea that it would decrease starter consumption. And starter is readily fermentable and what's needed to get the VFAs to develop the rumen. So the latest recent research has shown that calves really only overconsume alfalfa out of all of our common forages. So there was a study in Spain where they offered different forages free choice along with free choice starter. And the calves consumed 14% of their total dry matter from alfalfa hay, and that did decrease the amount of starter that they consumed. But when they offered them other forages like grass hay or straw, the calves only consumed about 4 to 5% of their total dry matter. So they didn't decrease the starter intake. And actually, the addition of those lower quality forages boosted the overall starter intake and the feed efficiency of the calves. So I think a small amount of forage can be wheat straw or grass hay, something like that. Just a small amount is probably beneficial for the calf. But we don't want to be feeding ad libitum alfalfa hay to young calves because they will consume too much.
And would you start this hay feeding right away, or
I'd
a week
say
or two, or
probably 2 to 3 weeks of age would be a good time to start that. And again, it's just a sprinkling on top of the starter, or if you're mixing it, just about 5% of the total formula.
And again, I don't know calves, but what about silage feeding to these young guys?
Yeah, the argument against silage has always been the high moisture content would limit intake, and some of the volatiles might not be the best for the young calf. But again, there's been some more recent research that shows that calves do pretty well on silage, and again, it's just a small amount. My bigger concern with silage feeding is that producers won't be able to keep the bucket or the bin cleaned out, and it goes bad, it goes moldy, and so on, which we certainly don't want for the young calf.
Jim, the title of your talk was Major Accomplishments in Calf Nutrition and Growth. I'm going to assume that the accelerated milk replacer is one of those major accomplishments.
Yep.
What are some of the others?
So my 5 main accomplishments, other than just the general proliferation of research that's happened over the last 25 to 30 years with calves, but the first of those is colostrum, knowledge about colostrum, and I highlight the recent paper that's established the different categories for passive transfer rather than just having a yes or no at 10 grams per deciliter. We've got it broken down into 4 categories now of excellent, good, fair, and poor. And that relates very well to the mortality and morbidity associated with young calves. So I think that's going to be a real help for the industry in evaluating passive transfer at the very early stage in life. The second thing that I'll go over is the feeding of more milk, and I highlight a paper published by Carolina Diaz and Mike Van Amberg in 2001, which was really the eye-opener for the industry and generated a huge interest in feeding more milk. The third was the publication of NRC 2001. I think that was the first time that people started to think seriously about calves. There was a separate chapter for them, so it must be important. And the model with that has been pretty widely used in the industry to demonstrate and calculate calf growth. Fourth is the explosion of behavior research, in particular related to feeding behavior and showing that calves that are fed conventional limited amounts of milk are hungry, as demonstrated by vocalization and increased restlessness. And then the fifth would be the NASEM 2021. I think that as people get used to that, it's going to be a big help to the industry. Unfortunately, there's still a few bugs in the computer model that we're still trying to get worked out. Hopefully this summer we'll have those last computer bugs out of the system and it'll be fully up and running. So I just encourage people to keep checking back with the National Academy Press site to get upgrades on the software.
Kind of circling back on number 4, the behavioral research, and can you talk a little bit about some of the welfare issues and consumer perception and some of those things?
Yeah. So I think we're coming up on several issues with young calves. I think the big one right now is cow-calf separation. And in Europe, there's quite a bit of research, actually demonstration systems now of keeping cows with the calf during the milk feeding period. Obviously, that has huge ramifications for the industry, and I can't even get my head around how that would work in a practical system. But that's a hot button issue for consumers. I think some of the other issues, they're all kind of related to that cow-calf separation, and the idea of group housing versus individual housing is another big one. People just don't like to see calves in their isolated hutches. So those, I think, are the big ones. Of course, there's things like dehorning and use of anesthetic and so on that are just kind of common sense issues that the industry is already handling. But I think the group housing and the cow-calf separation issues are really going to be important.
I'm curious how they're handling that in Europe, where they're trying that out. Do you have a feel for how they're managing that?
Yeah, I don't have a very good understanding of the system. I've not seen it in practice, but it's similar in a way to the idea of a beef calf with a creep feeding system, that they're able to separate the calf at the time of milking and still allow the calf to be with mom the rest of the time.
Have they measured the impact on the calf as well then, both from a welfare perspective and also a growth and productivity perspective?
I think there's some data available that the calves are going to do well because they're getting ad libitum milk, so they'll do well. I think the milk production, the couple little snippets of data I've seen, doesn't seem to hurt the milk production of the cow too much, and I think the calf is certainly going to benefit. The downside of that is they still have to be weaned at some point, and you're still, it's going to be like the beef system where the calf is bawling at a later age, but whether that'll be more acceptable to consumers or not, I don't know.
Yeah, good point.
So, Jim, talking about weaning, what are some learnings as far as trying to avoid post-weaning slump?
Yeah. I think, as we've gone to the greater milk feeding, we've actually worsened the weaning problem because we haven't changed our mindset about how to wean the calves. I think the big issue is weaning too early before starter intake is increased adequately. So weaning at 8 weeks instead of 6 weeks, for example, there's some good research showing the improvements in total nutrient intake at 8 weeks relative to 6 weeks. So I think that's one. A gradual step down in milk amount is another, so that it stimulates starter intake to ramp up and replace the nutrients that are being lost from the milk. The forage feeding, we talked about that already. You don't want to rely too much on forage around time of weaning. Starter quality and composition are important. Poor quality starters that are dusty or a lot of fines, poor quality ingredients certainly can have a negative effect. Water availability is a common problem on many farms, not having enough water. And avoiding, we've known this for years, not stacking stressors, not vaccinating and dehorning at the time you're weaning, those kinds of things to minimize the the total stressors on the calf.
What about all this stuff on transition milk feeding? Is that worth doing, or cost and benefits or risk?
Yeah, there's some reasonable research. There's a handful of studies that have shown positive effects of carrying out transition milk. It's just a really difficult system to implement on a large dairy where you're collecting milk from cows that can't go in the tank, but it's not really separated into the transition milk. So it's not a management friendly system, but I think there is some biology behind it.
While we're on the subject colostrum, what are some of the best practices or key advancements that's been made over the last 25 years?
I think one of the big advancements is just a better understanding of what colostrum does for us. The focus has been on the passive immunity transfer, but just the nutrient composition and provision of colostrum as the first food for the calf after birth is hugely important. We know it's very different than whole milk, high in protein, a little bit lower in lactose. A lot of the vitamins and minerals are in really high concentrations, so the nutritional aspect is really important. And then the growth promoting effects of colostrum. There's a myriad of hormones and growth factors and cytokines and other immune system components. And so there's research to show that calves won't respond to greater milk feeding unless they're adequate in colostrum status. They have to have those growth factors in there to turn on the gut and allow it to assimilate nutrients, and I think also to kind of turn on the muscle systems for using those nutrients for growth as well. So, I mean, the basics haven't changed much. Getting it in quickly after birth, an adequate quantity. The feeding of 3 to 4 liters by a tube feeder is very common. And then measuring quality, and that's gotten better with the use of the refractometers now that are very commonly used. And probably the biggest newer development is understanding the importance of cleanliness and sanitation and how easily colostrum can be contaminated so that the calf is ingesting a huge load of bacteria if we're not careful.
Has there been any research showing the lifetime performance of animals that received adequate colostrum as compared to those that didn't or didn't get it in a timely perspective? Yeah,
there's a study out of Arizona, I believe, years ago that looked at brown Swiss calves and cows. And the only difference in the study was they got 2 liters of colostrum or 4 liters of colostrum at birth. The animals that got the 4 liters of colostrum produced more milk through the first 2 lactations than the calves that only got the 2 liters. So it does seem to have a lifetime altering effect.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
This is a little bit off topic, but it's on colostrum. And when we were doing NASEM, I thought this was a huge deficiency in data, and that's factors that affect nutritional quality of colostrum.
Yeah.
Are you up to date, and what's new on this kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's funny because as much as we know about milk synthesis, we know very little about the actual synthetic regulation of colostrum. Certainly, adequate protein supply, metabolizable protein supply is important for both quality and quantity. All the immune related minerals and vitamins are important. Beyond that, there's not a real good understanding of what regulates, particularly the colostrum volume. I think one of the, in the sheep literature, there's much more information about colostrum, and either underfeeding or overfeeding energy relative to the requirement resulted in a decrease in colostrum quantity in the sheep. So I'm guessing that if we're underfeeding energy by too much, that it could have an impact, or likewise, if cows are overfed and fat, they may have a lower quantity of colostrum. The quality, I think, is, I mean, the best we can do is just ensure that we're doing a good job in nutrition for the close-up cows. And the quantity is just a big black box yet, in my opinion.
I think these people who do pre-fresh nutrition, I'm as guilty as anyone. It's such an easy measurement.
Yeah.
And I never thought of it for 30 years. I never measured.
I know. And I think we're getting enough data now that somebody could do a meta-analysis and take a look at the factors that are associated with the lower volumes.
That would be very valuable.
Yeah.
So Jim, in all the controlled energy research that you did in dry cows, did you ever see any differences in colostrum yield or quality?
No, not quality for certain. There is a trend, and again, I think a meta-analysis might pull this out, for the controlled energy to have slightly lower colostrum volume in the first milking. So I think that, again, if we're maybe going a little too far on the, controlling the energy, it might have a limiting effect. One nutritionist that I have a lot of respect for suggested that it was a lack of fatty acids from the controlled energy diets, because they are very low fat.
Right.
So that's an interesting idea that could be followed up.
Jim, I'm wondering what's next in the calf nutrition frontier.
That's a very good question. I'm getting ready to retire, so it'll be for the younger people that are left in the industry. But I think the amino acid area is still important to getting a good system there, and trying to both minimize costs and be good environmental stewards with minimizing excretion of nitrogen. I think the colostrum area from the cow side is a huge opportunity for someone to tackle. And I think continued research into workable systems on the higher milk feeding rates, intensified systems. There's still room there to really define good systems that are easy to implement on the farm and that result in a smooth weaning without loss of performance across that weaning period. I think the weaning area is one that's been kind of ignored as far as the frequency with which we run into that on actual dairy farms.
What about, we haven't talked much about the wean calf, post-weaning, but still young calf. What's new and what's recommended practices for these?
Yeah.
Again, before they're what we'd call growing, but.
So I think there's a recognition there also that there's not been a lot of research in that young calf area. It used to be very common to feed a limited amount of concentrate and ad libitum forage. I think we're cheating the calf at that young age yet by doing that. I think they still need more grain and a limited amount of forage up through 4 to 6 months of age. So I think there's room for some good research in that area. Mike Steele now at Guelph has done some work in that area, but I think there's room for a lot more.
What about, and I get this question once in a while when I was working, Jersey calves, are they just small Holsteins, or do we have to feed these guys differently?
In the NASEM publication, we kind of punted on that, again, for lack of good data to model energy requirements. But there's enough information that it seems that they may have a slightly higher maintenance requirement. And they certainly, because of their small size and high surface to mass ratio, that they take more feeding relative to their body size to keep them healthy and growing. So, there are some commercial milk replacers that are designed for Jerseys that are high protein and high fat. Years and years ago, when I was just starting out, we did a little experiment when we still had Jersey cows at the University of Illinois. And just to get a control calf that would survive in cold weather, we had to feed 12% of body weight as milk. and that was only to keep them alive, you know. So I think that they're very sensitive to the energy side of things, particularly in adverse weather environments.
Then these Holstein Jersey crosses, the best would be a half and half or something.
Probably,
Best
yeah.
guess.
Yeah, they seem to be pretty hardy in from what I've seen, and maybe grow more like a Holstein than a Jersey, which is probably good.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, this has been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. As we get ready to close things out, I'm going to turn to Dr. Zimmerman. And Clay, is there any key messages that kind of caught your attention today?
Our last call question is sponsored by AminoSure XM Precision Release Methionine, the next generation in amino acid balancing. With AminoSure XM, you can save up to 5 cents per cow per day on your methionine investment. Try it today and receive an additional 2.5 cents per cow per day savings with Balchem's limited time rebate offer. Contact your Balchem representative to learn more.
Well, it had me, thinking back over my career actually, right? And how much things really have changed in calf nutrition. So
Right.
there's been some pretty amazing changes here.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah, there's been a lot to ponder here. Some really good moves forward from the starvation strategy, basically, right?
Yeah.
To really more efficiently growing these calves.
Yeah,
at a young
absolutely.
age.
Very interesting. Bill, any key takeaways for the audience today?
Well, almost all this is new to me, so lots of stuff. But I think, as we get these cows are producing more and more and more, we've got to treat the calves better if we're going to keep getting more from the cow. And it's amazing to me how much progress has been made for someone who doesn't follow this literature. But yet there's still a lot of unknowns. There's job opportunities for calf researchers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jim, you're going to be giving the presentation here in just a couple hours, I think. In your presentation, what's some of the take-home messages that you've put together for the audience?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, just emphasizing the importance of colostrum, that it's an old story, but it's still vital to the success of the operation. We're going to talk about the greater milk feeding rates and how it results in better cows. It seems to have impacts on health and growth and even reproduction as well as milk production. We'll talk about practical implementation of the strategies, and we'll talk about weaning as a barrier to the success of the program. And again, some of the things that we talked about here as far as easing that weaning transition. So those are going to be my main messages.
Great. Well, Dr. Drackley, this has been a joy. Appreciate having you back here at the Real Science Exchange. I think this might be your third trip, if I'm counting correctly.
I think so, yeah.
So I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome.
Also like to thank our loyal listeners for joining us once again. Hope you learned something. I hope you had some fun, and I hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.